Silvercrow.
Welcome to the Urban Witch Podcast, where modern magic meets ancient wisdom. Stay tuned as we discuss the importance of folklore and how it helps us evolve as a species. Stay tuned. For the entirety of human civilization, we've told stories, and storytelling has been an integral part of who we are as people. We've, the old kind of stereotypes and tropes of tribes, people sitting around fires, sharing stories of times gone by under the stars is it's a popular image that we see across all kinds of cultures, and it's not it's not wrong. It's been an important part of our human experience for as long as we've been humans. We've told stories. We've sat beneath the sky and beneath the stars and sat in the comfort and the warmth and the safety of fire. And we've shared knowledge. We've passed on wisdom and knowledge of our past through ancestral lines from one generation to the next. And we do that now even. We tell stories and kind of experiences now. We tell our children of experiences that we perhaps had when we were younger, or we teach children how to exist in the world, and more often than not, really, we end up, as adults, continuing a similar sort of path to how our parents lived. Our styles of parenting will be very similar. We'll tend to gravitate towards similar experiences as we had ourselves as children. And all of this kind of knowledge has come about just because our parents or whoever raised us kind of told us certain ways of being. They taught us how to be human, what it was to be human, at least in their perception of what that was to be human. And likewise, that's not changed throughout history. And folklore is an important part of that. The whole thing with sharing folklore and with continuing to repeat the folk tales from all different cultures is about just that. It's about culture. It's about honoring our culture and extending that culture, helping our culture survive and thrive over generations of human civilization. In our modern times, and even in ancient times as well, we as a people we've mixed with other cultures from all over the world. Particularly in England, we have always been a kind of melting pot of cultures from all over the world. We've had, we've voyaged and moved to different places in the world, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. Sometimes we've left scars on the places we've voyaged, but also we've gained a lot, and we've left legacies, positive legacies too. And so when people are moving about all the time, then they bring with them stories. They bring their own culture with them. And so when we blend that culture together, then we tell these stories and we share parts of those cultures. And that's always been the case. I think as witches and within witchcraft and within magical practice and the occult arts in general, I think really there's a huge sort of we utilize folklore and myths and legends to our advantage at times. We tell stories, of course, and they help us. If we're particularly in the pagan religions, the connection with the gods and goddesses are often intricately kind of connected to folklore and folk tales, and that's a good thing. It helps people to connect with their gods and goddesses. If we're not religious, or we're not if we're not we don't, some of us, like me, I don't worship gods and goddesses. I don't connect with my magic in that way. but it doesn't mean I don't respect and understand and feel that folklore and the stories of those religions and of those cultures are important, because they are. I think what we tend to underestimate the power of storytelling. We tell stories all the time. We tell stories to ourselves. We tell stories to other people, and they could be anything from simple stories about ourselves. We tell people a version of who we are, and it doesn't always tally with who we actually are underneath. We often tell people stories of who we are. I think the whole thing with stories and storytelling and folklore particularly is it's about far more than just telling these whimsical kind of stories. And we've all heard the stories. There's stories, countless stories out there of creation myths and legends, and stories of heroic feats from gods and goddesses and demigods and monsters, and so on and so on and so on. And there are countless stories from countless countries, from countless places all over the world, and even within regions of those same countries, there are countless stories. Just going from region to region and town to town in England, for instance, we'll come across thousands of different types of folk tales and folk heroes and villains and so on. So it's always been something that is that's a powerful part of who we are and a powerful part of our humanity. But I think the importance, at least in a magical context, and at least as in a witchcraft context, as in practicing a practicing witch, in the sense of how we connect with storytelling and folklore. I think there's something profound about it, and it's not just about. Obviously, it is about sharing cultures and it's helping those cultures survive. Back in since ancient times, it was also about passing on knowledge that was useful to keep us safe, to keep us alive. There's lots of folk tales that have sort of kind of lessons, sort of moralistic lessons, or often they have kind of safety lessons. Don't go into the dark woods because the big bad wolf will get you, kind of thing. We've made stories in order to maintain our safety and maintain our survival. Don't forget, back in ancient times, we didn't have the securities that we have now. Even now, life is tenuous, and it can be snuffed away as quick as it can be made. But at the same time, back in those times, we've had, we've as a species, we've come through a huge amount of upheaval and turmoil and trauma and disasters and so on, in all kinds of ways. And there are many more people who have been taken from existence than are around today. So really, the whole practice of telling stories and of sharing folklore is about keeping culture alive, but it's also about delivering and passing on these snippets of wisdom and snippets of history, lessons of safety and morality, lessons of how to be and how to kind of survive the experience of what it is to be human, and also how to live a life as a human. We all have our sort of those lessons that are kind of ingrained in our DNA almost. They've come from the passed down from grandparents and great grandparents and so on and so on. And I think if we think about it, all of us will have memories of stories that we were told as children from our grandparents and our great grandparents or parents perhaps, and we will have these memories of this stuff that's been sort of passed down, and really that has helped us be who we are now, right? We've become the people who we are now, partly due to the fact that we had those influences from early on. We even within folklore, the countless folklores around the world is all about kind of delivering. It's like a delivery method, I guess. It's a delivery method of giving us information of our past and information of our culture, important information for our survival. But it's not just folk tales and folklore. Even things like nursery rhymes and fairy tales all have threads of truth. They're not just whimsical stories that we're told as children. In fact, things like nursery rhymes and fairy tales were never intended for children, really, and neither were folk tales. They were designed to deliver messages through kind of veiled sort of stories that allowed us to remember. And particularly with things like nursery rhymes, nursery rhymes are really powerful methods of delivering hidden information, delivering information that might be important to us. And rhyme is a hugely powerful factor in how we remember. We always remember things that are rhyming or rhythm. Anything that has a rhyme or a rhythm, we tend to remember them better. And so creating rhyming sort of short, whimsical type sounding tales that they became vehicles of delivering this information in a really quick sort of manner, but also in quite a veiled, hidden way. And often, nursery rhymes, particularly, most of our nursery rhymes that are common nursery rhymes that we know today, most of them were invented in taverns, in ale houses and pubs and taverns from way back, and they were often done as kind of veiled ways of talking about politics or monarchs or situations and events that were happening at the time when they were being told. And don't forget, back in those days, even now we have issues with freedom of speech in lots of parts of the world. The UK is not exempt from that either. We have issues with our freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and there are governments and different bodies who attempt to stifle that freedom of speech, and that was true back in ancient times too. Monarchs and church authorities and powerful leaders, governments, and so on, didn't want you speaking out against a leader, or a powerful body. So it would be a criminal offence. It would be punishable, often by imprisonment or fines or even executions, depending on the type of on the type of information that was shared. If it was something that was deemed to be treason or heresy, then the sentences could be severe, as execution. And so there was a real effort to kind of hide these veiled attempts at these discussions that were often held in huddled groups within taverns. And so nursery rhymes became a real easy vehicle of delivering those types of things, and and not just political upheavals, but also things like mockery of monarchs, but also things like agricultural secrets and things that were useful to a people who relied heavily on agriculture. In a good example of this would be the popular nursery rhyme, Hey Diddle Diddle. Hey Diddle Diddle, the cat had the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon, the little dog laughed to see such fun, and the dish ran away with the spoon. Such a simple little rhyme, and it's in countless children's nursery rhyme books, and we've heard it thousands of times over the course of hundreds of years. But that actually started off as a star map. It hides within it a secret star map, and the idea being that obviously agriculture relies on weather, it relies on the seasons, and so back in when we kind of pick apart the language used in some of these nursery rhymes and folklores and fairy tales, what we arrive at is that we start to see like how some of the language has shifted and how it sort of allowed the people at the time to hide important information within simple little rhymes that are memorable, so that you can recite them back to yourself quite quickly, and it delivers you with some kind of with like a point of reference, a context in which to remember this stuff. And so that nursery rhyme in itself is an important agricultural star map, and the idea being that the words themselves, like to diddle, back in sort of 13, 14, 1500s, to diddle was a word that was used in Old English that essentially meant to be lazy. If someone was a diddle, if someone was described as a diddle, it meant that you were lazy and you weren't doing your work. You were just laying about doing nothing. And so the very first line of that nursery rhyme, "Hey diddle diddle," essentially is talking to a farmhand. That's the whole point here. And it's a farmhand that's just laying about doing nothing. And it's saying, hey, lazy person, get up. It's time to plant the crops. The animals within that, the cat and the fiddle, they refer to star constellations. So the cat refers to Leo, the star constellation, Leo the lion. And the fiddle refers to another constellation called Lyre. And lyre, as in a lyre, was a kind of old sort of medieval string instrument that's a little bit like a violin almost. So the cat and the fiddle was sort of like these two constellations. The cow jumping over the moon, the cow refers to Taurus, another star constellation that appears over the moon in early spring. And all of these different animals that are being depicted here and objects are essentially all star constellations. So we have Leo, we have Lyre, we have Taurus, the bull constellation that appears over the moon. The little dog is Canis Minor, which is another star constellation. And it's saying, the little dog laughed to see such fun. And the dish ran away with the spoon. The dish is kind of what we often refer to now as the Big Dipper. It's kind of like a large, almost pan-shaped sort of object, constellation in the night sky. And the spoon is one that looks very similar, but is a lot smaller. So the dish ran away with the spoon is that they're quite close together, but they're a lot. The spoon type, the spoon type constellation is very small compared to the Big Dipper. And so when you put all that together, what they're saying is when all of those constellations are visible in the night sky, in those various positions, like the constellation of Taurus being over the moon. At that time, then is when it's time to plant the crops, because that is in the northern hemisphere. That is early spring. That would be around sort of this time of year, sort of March, April sort of time. And so that in itself, just a simple little rhyme like that appears to have nothing at all to do with farming, nothing at all to do with agriculture, is a hidden star map in itself. And there are countless things like this. There are countless nursery rhymes, folk tales, figures within fairy tales and folklore that all depict these kinds of ancient histories and knowledge that are all hidden in plain sight. And the very nature of occult practices, which witchcraft is one of them, is about, the word occult itself means that which is hidden. So it's about looking for these hidden things, looking for aspects of hidden knowledge and hidden wisdom in every day, in things that we regard as kind of mundane. I think we can all sort of say about, the importance of family and the importance of stability within our early life, particularly, but all of our life really, and folklore and folktales help do this. They help kind of bring families together. They help connect generations together. They help us connect, our younger generations connect with older generations, and it helps us to kind of figure out where we came from. By understanding the stories of our past and understanding the stories that those much older than us were telling, grandparents, great grandparents, and so on. When we understand those, then it helps us connect with those people. And, within witchcraft, especially sort of ancestral reverence is an important aspect to most of us. You know, we have our ancestors to thank that we're here today, right? You know, if it wasn't for those that came before us, then we wouldn't exist. And so the very fact that they survived and how they lived their lives and how their lives sort of panned out, and the fact that they managed to meet others and form relationships and have children that then eventually led to us, you know, that's the reason we exist now. We wouldn't exist. We have our existence, our entire existence as a people. We have our ancestors to thank for that. And the odds of all of those ancestors, you know, going way back to the beginning of time, the odds of all of those ancestors meeting each other, staying together long enough to have children, and then, you know, and staying alive long enough to have children, and then those children also surviving to adulthood to have more children, and so on and so on and so on. The odds are astronomically small for that. You know, they're almost impossible. So all of us who are alive now are walking impossibilities, really. We are walking miraculous impossibilities, who in the according to statistics, really, we shouldn't exist at all, because it's such an astronomically small chance that we would have that all of our ancestors would have survived that long, in order for us to be here now. So, you know, the reverence for ancestors and those older than us is important, and the passing down of that knowledge from those people who lived before us is also important, to not just to maintain our history and to maintain our cultures, but also to maintain our connection to family members who went before us, who passed before us. So all of the whole thing with folklore, in general, folklore, nursery rhymes, fairy tales, or I would encourage anyone to study everything you can about folklore from all different parts of the world. Myths and legends are important, fairy tales, nursery rhymes, all of those things have hidden knowledge within them. And by unpicking those types of knowledge and understanding the language that came within our history, you know, from older, sort of like much older versions of English or whatever other language you speak, by understanding all of that and putting it all together, then we start to piece together a picture of how our history actually was and what came before us. And it starts to form a cohesive and coherent structure of how we live now, with all of the lessons that were taught, you know, from back then. And when we put all that together, what we get is it enables us to connect more fully with nature. You know, if you find often that all of those threads of history and threads of ancestral knowledge and wisdom are intrinsically connected to the natural world, because we came from the natural world, right? We all started off by being an intricate part of the natural world. And we've kind of lost our way a little bit over time as we've become sort of more modern, and we've sort of technology has advanced and so on. But really, it's about deepening that connection to the natural world again, and to find our way back through time, almost, you know, through these stories, in order to help us connect back to nature again, and get connected back to our ancestors, back to our history, and back to the natural world, because it teaches us so much, and it helps us to navigate this life that can be difficult at times. It helps us to navigate it in a more meaningful way, and by respecting the ground we walk on, literally the ground we walk on, and the air we breathe, and everything that comes with that, everything within the natural world, which we are obviously part of that. So not only does it help us to connect with the natural world, but it helps us connect with family, with ancestors, and with each other. And by sharing these stories, we help connect with each other, with new generations that haven't even been born yet, and with those that have gone before us. And so we maintain this line, and it's kind of like a silver thread running all the way through, back through time, that connects us deeply to our ancestral lines and to who we were and who we are today. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Urban Witch Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on all the socials at Silvercrow UK, and also check out our brilliant website at silvercrow.uk and see all the great stuff that we do. Until next time, stay wild, stay wise, and keep the magic alive. Take care.